Well, a pleasant good evening to all of the listeners and the viewers of GBN Television, to you wherever you are. I say a pleasant good afternoon to you. It is the first day of the month of November, and it's indeed a pleasure being here with you on Beyond the Headlines. This evening, we take a look at COVID-19 and its impact. Certainly, it has come to pervade every aspect of our lives, not just, of course, how we do what we do, but certainly has transcended, of course, what happens as we move into the next generation. And this evening, we take the conversation beyond the headlines as we put under the microscope COVID-19 and diabetes. Certainly, it's a section of our populace that, as you can well appreciate, there's a great number of persons who live with the disease. And the question is, how has COVID-19 impacted their lives? What can they do? Can they survive the pandemic as it is? This evening, we put that discussion under the microscope. My guest this evening is Dr. Matthias and Dr. Joseph, and certainly it is our hope that as we go through the next hour and a half, that we would be able to enlighten you and share some much needed information on the subject. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Beyond the Headlines. Dr. Matthias, let me just allow you to, as part of the introductory process, just to greet us. How are you?
I'm doing well, and thanks for the invitation. And to my colleagues in Grenada or on via the internet, I say good night to you and hope that our discussion tonight will enlighten us all on the diabetes and COVID-19.
Dr. Joseph, your opening thoughts?
Good night, everyone. Thanks again for the invite to this program. I'm honored to share the platform with, distinguished guests such as Dr. Matthias. So I'm just hoping to add my little 2 pence to aid to this discussion.
And indeed, your 2 pence it shall be. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Beyond the Headlines. We take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we put the subject under the microscope, living with diabetes during a COVID-19 pandemic. Quick commercial break, and we'll be right back.
A 3-month supply of prescribed medications on hand in the event of an emergency or disaster. Keep medications in a sealed, labeled container that you can carry with you at a moment's notice if you need to evacuate. A message from the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council in collaboration with the Ministry of Health with support from the Pan American Health Organization.
Introducing Color by Sissons. 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 Color by Sissons.
We support you at every stage of your life.
For business,
for your education,
for your financial freedom,
for that new ride.
Upgrade your life with the Communal. Contact us today.
Are you looking for quality herbs and herbal supplements? Or are you thinking about having a complete body cleanse to jumpstart your health? Then no need to look further. Visit Nirvana Natural Health Clinic, Detox Center, and Natural Health Store. We carry a wide range of herbal products for kidney and gallstone cleansing, male sexual enhancement formulas, asthma and sinusitis, gas and bloating, acid reflux, constipation, arthritis, imbalanced hormones, female health issues, liver cleansing, weight loss, and so much more. Also available, colonic irrigation, holistic health consultations, essential oils, and diffusers. Look out for our online natural health store coming soon. Call 231-6642 418-7115 or 449-7753 to find out about our delivery options or to book an appointment. Visit us at Belmont St. George's, close to the Foliage, Monday to Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Nirvana Natural Health Clinic. Detox your way to health.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome back to the program. I'm Joseph Cadore, and a special good evening to you as we invite you to Beyond the Headlines. The conversation this afternoon would surround COVID-19, the pandemic, and diabetes, living with the disease during the pandemic. My guests this evening, Dr. Matthias and Dr. Joseph. Gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the program. I want us to set the premise for this evening's conversation by assuming that nobody knows what we're talking about. COVID-19, what is it, Dr. Matthias?
Well, COVID-19 is a viral infection that invades the body and as a result of that cause many systemic problems, namely the lung, pneumonia or pulmonary disease, or it may infect the pancreas. You may have pancreatitis. It may affect, and as a result of that, you may develop diabetes. COVID-19 affects every organ in the body. The heart can also have effect with developing blood clots. And so I will say COVID-19, a virus that is very stealth-like. It destroys tissue.
If we were to look at these, identifying the disease, the virus as it is, Dr. Joseph, let's talk about some of the symptoms of the disease. How do you identify it?
All right. Well, generally, for the most part, COVID-19 behaves like an average respiratory virus that starts off with initial non-specific symptoms such as fever. You can have a cough, which can produce some sputum or mucus, and then other generally fatigue associated with loss of smell, loss of taste, and could generally have a feeling of getting ill, like almost like you're getting the flu. Right? As the disease progresses, especially the respiratory, persons later on in the disease course, generally around like day 6 onwards, closer to day 10 of the disease, might develop shortness of breath, where persons have described it as trying to breathe out of a straw. All right? That's generally the common manifestations of the disease. But like Dr. Matthias alluded to, the disease is systemic and can affect almost every organ in the body. Right? So some people come down with something called encephalopathy, where the brain is affected and becoming extremely confused and lethargic. All right? Others come in with, digestive symptoms such as diarrhea and vomiting, even after they would have had the respiratory symptoms. So there's a wide array of symptoms associated with COVID-19, but those I mentioned earlier, these are the most common ones and the ones that we've seen with the initial strains of COVID-19.
We've had the conversation that the disease as it is, it has quite almost a huge survivability rate. But persons with underlying conditions, Dr. Matthias, they have particular concerns to health officials. Why is that so?
Well, basically, with the underlying conditions, or we call comorbidities, those are individuals with being obese, hypertension, a diabetic, or heart failure. Those are common comorbidities in individual that outcomes may be severe. And as a result of that, for example, let's look at diabetes, hypertension. They can be in pre-inflammatory conditions, and then being infected with COVID-19, that augments the disease process, and thus the outcome may be severe. So those conditions, as I alluded to earlier, are risk factors that once you get infected with COVID-19, the outcome or the severity of the disease can be a downhill slide for individuals.
Having established that, we want to focus this evening on persons that are suffering with diabetes. I mean, it is one of the diseases that certainly has come to affect and cause of Grenadians, not just Grenadians, the region and the world at large. Tell me, gentlemen, is a diabetic more susceptible to contracting COVID-19?
Very good question. And as today is into the first of November is termed the Diabetes Awareness Month, I will say that having diabetes is not a risk equivalent to contracting COVID-19. They have the same risk as the general population. But the concern is that if you're a diabetic, and you contract the COVID-19, the outcomes, the severity of the disease may be worse than your part.
The outcome, what makes a person that is diabetic, what makes the outcome for them so much different from, let's say, an individual who has other underlying conditions?
Well, as an endocrinologist, diabetes itself is a risk factor for many other illnesses. But in diabetic patients, the hyperglycemia or the high blood sugar reading itself has decreased your immune response to foreign invasion like a virus. So once you contract that disease, you haven't got that robust response. That response that there is a foreign entity in you, you are less responsive. So you give the COVID-19 infection the opportunity to invade the body more aggressively. So high blood sugars or being diabetic itself, that increased the risk. But let me share this with you, is that once COVID-19 enters the body, specifically I'm going to focus on the diabetes realm here, is that on the cell surface of the cells that makes insulin, which you need to control your blood sugars, what COVID-19 does, it binds the surface of these cells and unlock the gate that enters these cells and multiply within these cells we call the beta cells. And it destroyed the cells that makes insulin. And as a result of that, you cannot control your diabetes because you need insulin to control the blood sugar. And what COVID-19 has done, it enters the cell and destroys the factory. It erupts the whole cell, so you cannot make the insulin to lower the blood sugars. In addition to that, the treatment for COVID-19, one of the main drugs we use for COVID-19 is high steroids, which can cause sugars to be high. So it's a bi-directional kind of effect we are having. COVID-19 destroying the target cells that produce insulin, and we are treating the patient with steroids that can cause the sugars to be high. So it's a double whammy for if you're a type 2 diabetic.
Yeah, so let me just add to that, because I happen to be part of the team that clinical response team for COVID-19 at the General Hospital. And just to, add some on the ground feedback and evidence from what Dr. Matthias has been saying, the diabetics that have had severe disease and made it to hospital, they seem to have had the worst go of it in terms of adverse outcome. Right? The diabetics have been very hard to control. Their sugar has been skyrocketing, along with the associated risk factor of obesity. But we've seen in the course of the outbreak that we had here with COVID-19 that the diabetics have had the worst go of it. Right? So it's just adding some tangible on-the-ground evidence to what Dr. Matthias is saying.
And let me piggyback on that, because I think it's very important to give our folks on the ground in Grenada who care for our COVID-19 infected folks thumbs up, job well done, because of the limited resources and they being able to do such a fantastic job. I think they all should be applauded.
I mean, certainly we say hats off to our health officials looking at where the numbers are at present compared to where we were just a couple of weeks ago. 124, 23, 24 active cases. Indeed, we have done well. Health officials have encouraged and have said to the nation, if you get flu-like symptoms, there is a strict protocol and a rule of engagement that should be followed. Should that rule of engagement be followed to the letter of the law when it comes to diabetics?
Well, I will personally say yes, because of the, especially as we said earlier, the diabetics, once they're affected, there is an uphill struggle in controlling their blood sugars. Because if they come to the hospital very late, and we know of a couple cases where that occurred, that individual had the flu-like symptoms and claim it's just a flu, and not knowing that flu-like symptom is an inflammation itself, and it will cause high blood sugars. And they delayed it and delayed, and at the time of arrival to the hospital, sugars were alarmingly high. Because of the outcome of diabetic patients being infected with COVID-19, I think they should. And I am in full support of face masks when mandated. So I will say yes, because of the outcomes in a diabetic patient. I will say follow the protocols.
I am diabetic, Dr. Matthias. Is confirmed by my practitioner. My symptoms are not that severe though, so I'm not hospitalized. Take me through what a day in the life of that individual should be like. Should they be less concerned, given that they probably, let's assume even maybe they're asymptomatic, let's say. Should an asymptomatic diabetic patient be less concerned than a one who literally they have full-blown symptoms?
Well, you have to remember, and I'm not an expert in the field of infection, but as from my reading, there are three phases that involve with COVID-19 infection. You have the initial phase where the virus infects the body, and then that's the first phase, and the second phase, the virus now starts to manifest its symptoms, and the third phase, that's where you have a blast. In other words, a cytotoxic state that can cause respiratory distress, etc. So if you're in the early phase, we are saying monitor the symptoms, monitor your blood sugars, drink a lot of fluids, be compliant with your medication, know what is going on. Because once you get an infection, the sugars will increase. So you have to be proactive. Reach out to your physician saying, I am on this present medication. My sugars are not well controlled. What should I do? And he will advise, most likely, to increase your prescribed medication dose or make some recommendations. Say, for example, if the sugars start reaching or the blood glucose start reaching above 200, 300, then you may need to be more aggressive with insulin therapy. And if the sugars continue to rise, remember, high blood sugar can cause dehydration and other mental conditions too. So you may have to seek help. So the management is progressive as the infection is progressing. So it's very important to be in touch with your physician so that they can guide you appropriately.
Dr. Joseph, take me through what the daily regimen. We've highlighted what should be done in the presence of COVID, but what should a daily regimen of a diabetic patient be like? Because I'm getting a sense that management of the condition is of critical importance, whether during a pandemic or in the presence of COVID or outside. What should that be like for a diabetic?
Okay. Well, for a diabetic patient, the two most important things that they have to focus on is their diet and how their blood sugars respond to the diet, right? A diabetic patient would be placed on certain dietary restrictions or rather guided and their doctor's plan. So what needs to be done, that a diabetic should have these basic things in their house: a glucometer, which is a blood sugar monitor, and they should have their medications and take them as prescribed. Generally, we're in the ballpark before meals. Their blood sugar should be under 130 milligrams per deciliter. So 130, under 130 is a goal before meals, right? And a diabetic, they get up in the morning, they check their blood sugar, then they have their breakfast. They eat their medication, they take their medications, they go through their day and the daily activity. When it gets to lunch, they check their blood sugars, should also be under 130, all right? The other thing that needs to check on is after meals, right? They may not have enough strips to check for their blood sugar quite that often, but again, in the early when there's early changes to a regimen of medications, whether it be insulin or change in the medication dose, they need to check to see how the sugars respond to that, right? So under 130 before meals and 2 hours after meals, their blood sugar should be like less than 180, right? So that's their main goal: control the type of the diet and the medications. In the setting of a pandemic, along with the general population, they need to follow and adhere to all the mandates when it comes to wearing of their masks, frequent sanitization of their hands, no gathering in large public spaces that will put them at risk, all right? And that's the general gist of how a diabetic should go about the day. They should have strict control of their blood sugars. They should have strict control of the diet, given whatever flexible parameters they discuss between their nutritionist and the doctor. And that should, as a diabetic, you would know that they're on top of things, right? And a long-term goal after that, just for them to understand, where their blood sugars are in terms of the A1C, but that can be discussed a little later. As for the daily routines, diet, medication, what are your blood sugars like?
And I will add to that, remember the exercise portion.
As you talk about the importance of the management process, knowing those numbers, whether it's in the morning or in the evening, are there some foods that can spike your blood sugar? And is it of critical importance that a diabetic be aware of those foods, what they are, when they should be consumed, and in what proportion?
That's why the point you use, know your numbers. And that's why in my practice, I always encourage, check your blood sugars 2 hours after you eat, because it will give you an idea about if that food has high glycemic or high sugar content, and so that you will be aware of the portion. So case in point, you may eat a banana, all right? Before the banana, your blood sugar is 120. 2 hours after the banana, you check your blood sugar. Now it's 250. You get that point, because now you're going to say, wow, not to say you can't eat the banana, you may have half of the banana instead of the whole. So to me, if you cannot see a nutritionist, checking the blood sugars 2 hours after you eat can give you some insight into the portion that you should eat and the quantity that you can have. So first, yes, you will see a nutritionist who will outline to you about carbohydrates and the effect carbohydrates have on blood sugars, and the effect exercise can help with preventing high blood sugars, etc. So nutrition plays a very important role, and there are many foods, starchy foods, may have high carbohydrate content and or high glycemic index in those foods that can spike your blood sugars. I am not saying don't eat it. I am saying the frequency and the portion size is very important. And you have to also understand, where are you on the timeline of diabetes? Are you in the early phase, mid phase, or later phase of diabetes? Because there itself, it will let you know how your portion size and the frequency will help, because it depends on your regimen that you're taking at the time.
I'm happy
and insulin reserve.
I'm happy that you're touching that, because we need to take a commercial break. But when we come back, we'll segue straight into that, the pre-diabetic stage and the different types of diabetes and how they can be handled. Beyond the headlines, Monday, we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back, Grenada.
You can now send a gift card to your loved ones locally or internationally thanks to the food fair. Here's how it works. Click the gift card icon or banner, customize your gift card by choosing from different templates, dollar amount, and personalized messages. You can also upload your personal design. Select Add to Cart and complete transaction. Allow relatives and friends to pick up an item or items at the food fair for the dollar value. Gift card. It's that easy.
Spare your pocket, spare the earth, always act when let you come first. Save energy, save a dime, we choose your wattage and we choose your time. When you use appliances, make sure you buy energy efficient every time. Spare your pocket, spare the earth, always act when let you come first. Spare your pocket, spare the earth, always act when let you come first.
Just a reminder, the global pandemic is not over. Office Pros and markers are still here to protect you. Available are several versions of touchless hand sanitizer and hand soap dispensers, dispenser stands, paper towel and toilet paper dispensers, and thermometers. Also available, hand sanitizing gel, sanitizing solution, hand soap, Lysol products, face masks, and gloves, all offered at the best price on the market and backed by a full warranty and protection plan with free installation. We are located on the Woodlands Main Road. Call Office Pros on 444-2393 or markers on 439-2393. You can also visit the Facebook page for more information. And never forget to remember, I, Mr. Markers, would never forsake you. Believe that.
When a loved one passes on, we all need the comfort, support, and guidance of a trusted friend. You can rely on LaCour Brothers Funeral Home. We provide a personalized professional service that exceeds all expectations. Our dedicated staff responds to your every need with the greatest detail, ensuring affordability with a variety of options. Our upgraded state-of-the-art facilities, spacious air-conditioned chapel with live internet streaming, a modern, environmentally safe crematorium, the only of its kind on island, private viewing spaces, large on-site repast center, a modern transportation fleet. Join our burial society today and make personalized arrangements for that final moment as you prepare to enter your loved one into eternal rest. Visit or call LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and select a package that brings added comfort to the entire family. LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and Burial Society, continuing a tradition of excellence.
What does it take to be an amazing woman? Lots of me time. Amazing women are classy, fancy, and a little sassy. It's the drink for me. Cheers! Sometimes you've got to show them who's boss. Alpha male? Nah, alpha females are more amazing. Cheers to securing the bag. We make time for ourselves, for work, friends, and we certainly make time for passion. We're simply amazing. Amazing cream liqueur for the amazing woman in you.
Good evening and welcome back to the program. I'm Joseph Cadore. This evening, we're taking an in-depth look at diabetes, existing, coping with, managing it during the pandemic. My guest this evening is Dr. Matthias and Dr. Joseph. Gentlemen, thank you. Welcome back to the program. Just before the break, we were on the subject of management of diabetes, and we have established that it's of critical importance. But we're talking about knowing the foods and the glycemic index and understanding the impact that it has on the body. Gentlemen, there's different types of food have different impact on different individuals. You made reference to a banana.
Yes, it does. For example, food with high in fiber may have a slower absorption of the glucose compared, which I call wasted calories. Food that is very starchy. Let's say, for example, here in the States with the donuts and ice cream, that will have a very high glycemic index, in other words. So here, you do not want sugars to rise quickly and stay up very high. You want it to be slowly absorbed and disappear quickly, because the higher the glycemic index is very toxic to the blood vessels. And there is a lining within the blood vessels we call endothelium. So the high glucose content of food and the sustainability of that within the blood vessels can cause destruction or create inflammation of that, and thus lead to the poor outcomes in terms of disease state. So here, the nutritionist is very important in guiding our patients in the do's and the don'ts of certain food. And I think, and I know that the team in Grenada is doing a marvelous job in empowering both outpatient and inpatient regarding their food intake with high glycemic and preferable low glycemic foods to help manage their diabetes.
Dr. Joseph, we're Grenadians. We know fig, blood, or dashing, that's what we live by. And we grew up understanding and appreciating, we were told, eat local, grow what we eat. That being a mantra that's been pushed, how much of a challenge is it, gentlemen, for diabetics, given that the very foods that we encourage to consume can be their Achilles heel, that takes us out as a diabetic? How difficult is it for us? Dr. Joseph?
So just piggybacking off of Dr. Matthias's point, right? There are foods which have a higher glycemic index than others, right? Basically what this is saying is that for the same volume, comparatively, of a food, it has a lot more sugary calories than other foods per se, all right? Right? In terms of, let's say, a donut, for its size, a donut might have almost 300 calories for a single donut, while a banana in itself, given the same size, might have just about 100, 105 calories, right? So given the volume, someone could sit down and easily consume 3 donuts, and that doesn't fill their stomach, but they would have consumed almost 1,000 calories, which throws their sugar way out of whack. Versus other foods such as your ground provision and your yam, your dashi, these kinds of things, right? They have a lower glycemic index for their volume, right? But it still comes back down to quantity, right? There's a whole saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. But if you eat 25 of those apples, your blood sugar is still going to be high, all right? So it comes down to quantity in terms of their portions and how much of it that you eat, right? So the easiest way to, like Dr. Matthias was trying to drag home, is to see how your body and how your blood sugar responds, right? So your blood sugar is normal before you eat, like maybe 120, and you notice that eating an entire apple or 2 apples ends up putting your blood sugar 2 hours afterwards at 200, 205, which is not acceptable, right? So you decide, okay, 2 apples is over the top. I'm going to cut it down to 1 apple, right? So the goal for a diabetic diet is to not necessarily cut you off of certain foods, right? But there are wiser decisions when it comes to the kinds of food that you eat and still feel satisfied and satiated, all right? So some things like pastas are almost like the devil, because pastas, the volume that people tend to consume in pasta, it's a lot, and the amount of calories packed into the pasta is just way too much for a diabetic to handle. So what will end up happening, if you do like pasta, you need to wait out, almost let your pasta be less than a handful, right? Or switch it out for something as like there are other options such as whole grain pastas or even brown rice, which again, compared to their processed counterparts, have more calories. So it's actually the issue is quantity. No, quality plays a part too. It's quantity more than anything. So all the fig and all the foods, the mangoes, the fruits, all of these are great. They're packed with nutrients. But if you eat too much of it, then it's going to be detrimental for a diabetic. So what needs to happen is to control your numbers, right? It's an individual process. It's a long road between you, your endocrinologist. If you don't have one, just your primary care physician, your nutritionist, and yourself, and along with your blood sugar monitor. You guys need to have a tight relationship.
We keep hearing the conversation, gentlemen, about gluten-free. It's almost become an easy selling point. Gluten this, I'm going to take it because it's gluten-free. Should that be a free port for a diabetic? It's gluten-free, I'm going to indulge, have me a feast.
Well. Gluten-free has nothing to do with diabetic regimen. Gluten-free is what is recommended for folks who may have a celiac disease process, a malabsorption process, an inflammatory bowel disease. So we recommend the gluten-free. Some folks may have gluten sensitivity, but because of the glycemic content in gluten, folks align with that. But I will say it's best to speak to the nutritionist, and because they will evaluate your level of physical activity. They'll evaluate you how much calories you burned a day, etc., and your body build, and recommend the necessary amount of calories you need. This is a very important point. Nutrition and physical activity is very important. It's the first line of therapy for all type 2 diabetic patients. Don't think that just medication. You will be surprised that if you comply to dietary changes and increase physical activity, you may be in a certain phase in diabetes. You can reverse it back. Just by losing about 10 to 12% of your weight, you will see how better those daily blood sugars are. Just 10 to 12% of your weight over a 6 months and 9 months period. It has been shown in studies. It has been remarkable. But you have to be willing to make that lifestyle change to benefit. So remember, diabetes management is not only the prescribed pills that we give, but you making the lifestyle change. Decrease your carbohydrate intake, increase your physical activity, and you will see how remarkable that is.
The management treatment that is applied, gentlemen, is it different based on if pre-diabetic, diabetes, or let's say diabetes 1 or 2?
Okay, so I'll take a stab at it before I let the experts say it a lot better than I can. So yeah, in the pre-diabetic stage, it's just like it's just like what it implies. Stage just before diabetes. right? Your doctor determines that based on certain evaluations from your blood test when it's getting close to that range of diabetes without reaching that threshold. And your doctor would then advise this, what Dr. Matthias has been advocating. Your diet needs to change, your exercise, you need to start an exercise regimen, you need to start losing some pounds, all right? So that alone can, again, prevent you from getting to the diabetic stage. So you start off, you get yourself into doing some aerobic exercises. Not everyone feels inclined to get in a gym. A gym would be convenient, but if not, 30 minutes of brisk walking 3 times a week is sufficient to get you up and moving and get your daily, your base metabolic rate up and get you start on the path to losing some pounds. All right, then once you change your diet, you start to consume less calories and all these big portions of meals that spike your sugars up and push you closer to the diabetic phase. Once you halt it in its tracks, then you can revert to those changes and possibly not even end up a diabetic. Because once you are a diabetic, again, this process is going to be a lot more difficult, and so it's advised that we halt it in its tracks. So that's a pre-diabetic stage. I'll let the expert talk about the diabetic stage.
I must say, Dr. Joseph, I think you can now jump over to the endocrinology world because you're doing a fabulous job. And I will just transition now because as Dr. alluded to, the pre-diabetic stage, lifestyle change is very important. And I think that everyone should have an idea where they are at this stage in life, because we all are at risk of becoming diabetic, because there is a correlation with weight gain and becoming diabetic, specifically type 2 diabetic, right? Type 1 diabetic, just to define that, is absolute loss of insulin production, and those individuals are dependent upon insulin. There are some cases of type 1 diabetic which can be sustained with oral agents, but that's more for the endocrinologist to help manage there. But just to simplify, the type 1 diabetic is absolute loss or very low levels of insulin to sustain an optimal blood glucose reading. With the type 2 diabetic, there are phases we go through, which I describe as a progressive disease. We heard about the pre-diabetic state, and that condition could be salvaged, in other words, back to the normal with lifestyle change. If that individual did not make that lifestyle change, or they are at heightened risk, mom, dad has that diabetes, and they have that heightened risk, their production of insulin decreases. And do you know at the time you are diagnosed with diabetes, at an average, you have lost 50% of your insulin production. And if the sugars are not well controlled, you lose 2 to 5% every year. That's why we say it's a progressive disease. And if it progresses, what's going to happen? Diet and exercise may not work. We now have to start with medication, right? And that's where we start with oral medication, and we make the recommendation, know your numbers. And it may progress that the medication, oral medication, may not work. So then we advance to insulin therapy. And there are other injectables that we use. So we want to prevent the insulin use. We want you to sustain and maintain dietary and exercise to control your blood sugar. But it can be an uphill struggle at times.
There are some taboos. I know you've seen your grandparents, you know that they're diabetic gentlemen, and you, for some reason, they get a craving for a pop soda. And instead of consuming it in its entirety, they dilute it with a gallon of water, and they assume that that is okay. Is that factual or total mythology?
It still boils down to the quantity. I mean, if you have like a bottle of soda, and you were to mix that entire bottle of soda with a liter of water, if she downs that liter of water mixed with all that soda, she's still consuming all that sugar that's in that soda, right? That's likely not going to happen. We advise our diabetics to stay away from sodas because of its very, very high glycemic index. It's like pure sugars in that and a lot of added sugars. Even the general population, just for your overall health, is advised to minimize sodas. If Granny wants to have one soda, and that soda does not alter her glycemic control, then kudos to Granny. But the likelihood of that happening is very low. So we just advise in general, let's stay away from these types of foods and types of drinks that have such high caloric intake and high amounts of sugars that it can trigger off things that can spiral down quickly. So we advise that she stays away from that.
But what if
that's very important.
Doc has a high metabolic rate? And she assumes, well, you know what, I'm okay. I'm going to burn that up because I'm doing gardening, I go walking. Should that matter?
Well, the level of exercise will definitely play a role in burning up that calories. But here again, that individual is out in the field, they're burning that energy up through utilizing the muscles, etc. But then, if you're out there and you're becoming dehydrated itself, that could become an issue. You can have more concentration within the bloodstream and the sugars could be high. So it has to be a balancing act with natural, with lots of fluids and increased activity that can help to a degree. But it is also important in our diabetic patients to remember that education, removing those misconceptions, those myths, those taboos, as you alluded to, that's why diabetic education is important. It's all a part of treatment too. And my discussion with the Grenada Diabetic Association, they will soon be starting classes for any new diabetic patients to attend, so that these things can be teased out and they can be empowered about these myths of that you shared with us.
Myth out there, and this is part of the drive to educate individuals. Gentlemen, I wanted to talk about gestational diabetes. How much of a concern should an individual be during this COVID period, or at all? Should the treatment in terms of its management be the same as a person that is in the pre-diabetic, or if they are type 1 or type 2? Let's talk about the treatment, gestational diabetes. Dr. Matthias.
So,
okay. Dr. Joseph, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Joseph, go ahead.
So gestational diabetes is, yes, a type of diabetes that develops during pregnancy. There are a lot of theories associated with a type of hormone that the placenta releases during pregnancy that causes a certain degree of insulin resistance and causes the person during that pregnancy to get very elevated blood sugars. So gestational diabetes, it develops during pregnancy. It can pose a problem to the unborn child, and so it gets treated. Right? That's part of your regular maternal screening at about roughly 28 weeks of gestation, right? So your physician or your obstetrician would indicate and have you do a test to see if you have gestational diabetes. And if it's confirmed, what happens is that you get to see your doctor. Sometimes they might put you in hospital. Sometimes they might do it as an outpatient setting, where they first try to control it in the same manner that we would do any other diabetic. We put you on a dietary restrictions to help control that. right? If it's not able to be managed with the diet alone, then your doctors would prescribe some insulin regimens, because the oral medications that we have now in our settings are contraindicated in pregnancy. So we have to resort to insulin therapy during pregnancy. All right. Given the nature of the disease, right? Generally, once the pregnancy is over, right, the person reverts to being a normal individual without these high sugars, and again, they don't have diabetes. There's a small percentage of that population that can go ahead and develop type 2 diabetes afterwards, but that's very uncommon. But the treatment is just as how we would treat our regular diabetics, where we start them off on diet, the diet is not working, and we have to resort to insulin. It's very common. It happens very often in pregnancies. You could have it in one pregnancy and not have it in the other, vice versa. And so it's a very common type of disease process that can happen in pregnancy. That's why it's important for anyone who's pregnant to get their prenatal checks. All right, even though they think everything's fine, they need to make sure that all is going well with them at the time. Right?
What's the potential risks?
Well, what should be added here is that the complication that may occur in gestational diabetes, you may have, for example, miscarriage, and you may have, for example, the babies. They will be huge babies, in other words, and they in turn has risk of developing diabetes. So not only maternal health, but you also have to look at the fetal health. Those are complications that occur with diabetes. Now, some of the recent guidelines recommend that if you have gestational diabetes and post-delivery, you can transition to becoming a type 2 diabetic. So here again, gestational diabetes is very important. And it's very good that you brought that up. I'm very excited because we have talked about the pre-diabetes, type 1, type 2, and now gestational. And there is also other kind of diabetes out there. But I'll leave for the host to make that.
We keeping our eyes on the clock. It's a minute on to the hour of 9 o'clock. We take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we want to look at diabetes in children. And of course, given that during the COVID pandemic, some of the myths concerning the vaccine and diabetic medication, if at all there is any to be concerned about. This is Beyond the Headlines for today, Monday, November the 1st.
Darling, would you like some tea? I've made your favorite.
Well, thank you, darling. I'm here finishing my blog post to help homeowners understand their electricity bills. The left side of your bill shows the rates for electricity and the government charges. The middle portion shows the number of units you've consumed, plus the history of your usage over the last 8 months. And the right side shows how much you're being charged.
I really think people are going to value this information.
Grenlec, energizing our Grenada.
Get Rubigas. Get cooking. Rubigas, clean, safe, and reliable LPG is the perfect solution for your commercial and everyday needs. For cooking at home or barbecuing, choose Rubigas LPG cylinders. Available in a variety of sizes from 20 to 100 pound cylinders. Rubigas LPG, clean, safe, reliable. Are you cooking with Rubigas?
Get Rubis, get going.
Are you looking looking for quality herbs and herbal supplements? Or are you thinking about having a complete body cleanse to jumpstart your health? Then no need to look further. Visit Nirvana Natural Health Clinic, Detox Center, and Natural Health Store. We carry a wide range of herbal products for kidney and gallstone cleansing, male sexual enhancement formulas, asthma and sinusitis, gas and bloating, acid reflux, constipation, arthritis, imbalanced hormones, female health issues, liver cleansing, weight loss, and so much more. Also available, colonic irrigation, holistic health consultations, essential oils, and diffusers. Look out for our online natural health store coming soon. Call 231-6642 418-7115 or 449-7753 to find out about our delivery options or to book an appointment. Visit us at Belmont St. George's, close to the Foliage, Monday to Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Nirvana Natural Health Clinic. Detox your way to health.
11 with diabetes during the pandemic, and that's the conversation this evening. In case you're just joining us, good evening and welcome to the program. We're just getting ready to go. We're going to go back to our guests, but certainly we want to give you the opportunity, those of you at home, to engage in whatever questions that you have. The number is on screen, 440-1252, and certainly you can feel free. We encourage you that when you call, please mute or move away from whatever device that you are close to. We can engage, have the conversation via the telephone. Again, my guests, gentlemen, welcome, Dr. Matthias and Dr. Joseph. There's so much we can talk about when it comes to diabetes. We know that an hour and a half literally doesn't do much justice, and we're getting ready to open the lines. We're in the pandemic, and certainly the conversation at some point we figured was going to touch and concern COVID-19 vaccines and medication. Is there anything to be worried about when it comes to me being diabetic? I'm on my medication, my regimens, be it insulin or otherwise, and I want to or have taken my vaccine shot. Any complications there? Anything, Dr. Matthias, that one should be in any way or fashion worried about?
Well, bottom line is that all diabetic patients should get the COVID-19, but we could always add a caveat if there is any autoimmune condition that may elicit adverse events again. But on the advice, looking at it, diabetic patients, as I alluded to earlier, once infected, the outcomes could be disastrous. So one thing we know, the vaccine protects. It doesn't prevent the illness, it protects you from having the complication. And I'm sure Dr. Joseph's experience at the General Hospital can allude to that. We saw it in what happened. We saw what happened in Grenada. So that we are not second guessing this from clinical experience, from observational data that we read about on the island. It's not hearsay. It's not conspiracy theories that we are inventing the complication. We experience it. In my clinic here in the States, I have seen my patients who are diabetic and got infected. Some of them survived. A small portion of them didn't make it. So yes, type 2 diabetic patients have a heightened risk of having severe complications if infected with COVID-19.
We're going to have to get to you, Dr. Joseph, but we need to engage a caller that is live. Good evening, caller. You're live. Your question, comments, please.
Right. I have two questions. My first question is something that, people are always a little confused with, and I am calling to seek a little clarity. No, you're diabetic, or you're not diabetic. Does eating lots of fruit, how would that affect your diabetes? And part of the question, venous insufficiency. If you have a problem with venous insufficiency, how would that affect your diabetes?
Gentlemen, Who wants to
Okay,
take a stab at
I'll
this
go
one?
with that first. All right. Basically, think about it. Fruits have what you call fructose, which is a sugar, right? And the body recognizes that as sugar. If you're a diabetic, are you producing enough insulin, or is your level of activity sufficient to lower the blood glucose? That's the question to ask, right? You eat a lot of fruits. Fruits are healthy, but as a diabetic, you may not be able to handle it because you are incapable of producing enough insulin to lower that glycemic content you're talking about. So that's why the 2 hours after eating is very important. So I do hope I shared some insight there. And what was the second question?
You wanted to comment, Dr. Joseph?
Oh, okay. Well, I was just trying to just kind of put it in context exactly what Dr. Matthias is saying. Fruits are healthy. You eat one mango is fine, but you cannot sit down as a diabetic and eat a whole bucket of mangoes. It's right.
Leave the mangoes alone.
It depends on what. It depends on what your glycemic control is like. If you're an athlete or you play a lot of sports as a diabetic who likes football and they're out playing in the field, you probably could handle 2 mangoes or 3 mangoes because you're finding ways to burn off those calories and use up the sugars that you consume. Right? But if you're at home all the time, you never go out, you sit down home and just watch TV all day and you're not very active, then you might not be able to handle 2 or 3 mangoes. Right? So it's all depends on your level of activity and how your body responds to the quantity of the fruit that you're ingesting. Right? The fruits, yes, they have all these micronutrients and other vitamins and other things that your body needs. But if at the end of the day you're not burning off the amount of sugar that you need to burn off, then you cannot have, you have to restrict the amount of the fruit that you're having. Okay?
Thank you, gentlemen. We have a caller on the line. Good evening, caller. You're live. Your question, comments, please.
My question is, the COVID vaccine, when you take it and you take another booster shot, and you have allergies and you have an allergic reaction, what would the people in the hospital do to take care of you?
Okay.
I didn't get the full question, but it spoke to the issue of taking the booster shots and allergic reactions. If you have allergies to the first one you took a booster shot, she's raising concerns about that. Anything they should be necessarily concerned about? I'm not sure if it is specific to an individual with diabetes.
Well, you have to be careful when they mention allergy, because, we play with all these terms often. You will get the shot, and yes, you'll get body ache, and you may get a mild fever, etc. That's a response to the injection. Is not an allergy. It's a natural, it's an induced phenomenon that will last for a brief period of time. So yes, you may have that sort of discomfort with the COVID-19 shot. And if you're going to get a booster, most likely it may occur again, but again, it doesn't last beyond, the typical timeline of 12 hours or 24, 48 hours.
We want to entertain as much calls as we want, but gentlemen, it would be remiss of me if we even in any way continue without talking about diabetes in children. We start local though. Dr. Joseph, how much of a concern is that? What's the trend have you seen during the pandemic?
Okay. Well, I personally, based on where I'm stationed, I don't deal with many cases of diabetics in children. I have seen a couple COVID admissions with diabetic younger adults, and that is rising concern in our population, given that there's a rise in childhood obesity. Right? That seems to be the main association with our diabetes in children. Our population is increasingly getting much more obese and overweight, and that then basically gives us a population that's more prone to getting insulin resistance and moving up closer to that spectrum of diabetes. Right? But I have limited experience with diabetics in children. My pediatric colleagues, they are more versed in that, and they have shared their concerns where there is a rise and concern for increasing numbers of the pediatric population with diabetes. In COVID, I have seen few cases. I can probably count them on my hands where we had younger individuals, not necessarily the pediatric age, but under the age of 25 and even as young as 18 with diabetes, and they have more severe disease when infected with COVID. But I did think Dr. Matthias would be more,
Dr.
would be more versed on diabetes in children.
Well, as an adult endocrinologist, but I do take care of those kids who transition into the adult clinic in endocrine. What we have seen is that, but let me preface this, that type 1 diabetics predominantly identify in the youth, and usually of a viral infection. And what we are seeing now is that folks may not have diabetes, but once infected with COVID, they have a new onset. Has the disease process lead to the diabetes, or did the COVID itself lead to the destruction of the beta cell, leading to type 1 diabetes? So that's where we have to tease things out. Yes, we are seeing a lot of youth today with diabetes, but it's because there's a relationship with increased weight, obesity, and the type 2 diabetes. But from my clinical experience being on the island for the past several years, working with many of the house staff, etc., in the community, we have identified loads of type 1 diabetic, probably silent, but not being identified, treated with the necessary investigation, and these kids were type 1 diabetic. So it's needful to identify many of our youth who present with high blood sugar. So the next step, I will say, is to check antibodies against that beta cell to see if they're a type 1 versus a type 2 diabetic.
Thank you. There's a caller on the line. Good evening, caller. You're live.
Yes, good night. I just want to find out something. I heard the doctor speak about the sugar testing in the morning, around lunchtime, and the evening. But my thing is, the strip and the machines are so expensive. But when you have a diabetic who is unable to do that regular testing of the blood sugar, they go to a doctor and they say, well, your sugar is out of control and it's spiking. How could you counsel someone as to managing a situation like that? It's difficult because you are not working, you don't have a job, you don't have an income, but you're just trying. But these things are so expensive and you need to do it. How could you counsel or help someone in managing diabetic from such a point of view? I'm looking forward for an answer. Thanks a lot.
Gentlemen, I'm happy you're the one that have to respond to this one and not me. How do you strike the balance?
It's a challenge. It is a challenge because managing diabetic patients, to be most effective, we have to know the numbers. And that's why I alluded to earlier, dietary changes and exercise is very important. Your carbohydrates intake is very important to help control diabetes. Increased level of physical activity. Well, why not? At least 30, 40 minutes walking a day to help help that muscles and fat cells to be more sensitive to whatever reserve insulin you have. Yes, the glucometer and the test strips are very expensive. And this is where you apply pressure to your policymakers so that they can negotiate and get things cheaper or at a lower price. Get involved with the Grenada Diabetic Association. They have ways and support and to help assist you there. And it is very important. I know, I've seen it, and I usually negotiate with patients just once a day, but at different times. You don't always have to check twice a day. Once a day, today breakfast, tomorrow lunch, the next day dinner, and then reverse it 2 hours after. So then you will have a set of numbers, and we can infer from that where the problem is, or what is happening midday. Remember, they have 24 hours. Not only in the morning you should check. You should check throughout the day.
I think added to that, gentlemen, you probably agree. I think, Dr. Joseph, you hinted to that earlier on. In terms of the management process, being able to manage proportions and size. Maybe what may be good, you start getting into measurements now, eating by measurements. So I'm not just going to have a bowl of rice, but I'm going to have, let's say, a cup of rice, because I understand that a cup of rice, this is what I get from it. I'm not going to have 4 grains of bananas, but I'm going to slice it and I'm going to have 2 grains, so at least I can manage. That certainly would be a nice way of being able to add to the conversation and the economic concerns. There is a caller, though, live on the line. Good evening, caller.
Hello?
Yes, good evening. You're live.
Right. So my question is about the vaccine. Right. So I am using metformin 500 milligrams. And I have taken both shots of the COVID vaccine. And earlier on today, I heard that they have just approved the booster. You can now take a 3rd shot as a booster. So as a diabetic, how would you agree for that, taking the AstraZeneca as a booster, or would you recommend taking the Pfizer as a booster? Or as a diabetic, would you recommend the booster on the whole?
Dr. Matthijs?
Okay, well, here I am in the States, and we have 3 vaccines: the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson. And the recommendations over here may be different to other countries, etc. So you have to follow the protocol within your jurisdiction, within your geographical area. So I cannot say this should be done in that area. And as an endocrinologist, I don't make those assumptions. But I understand the disease, and my objective is to prevent hyperglycemia, elevated blood sugars. I do know that taking the vaccine, the short-term immune response causes high blood sugars just for a period of time, 18 hours. You may see the sugar rise and then it goes back down. That's the immune response that occurs when you get a COVID-19 vaccine. It's a normal response. So I advise my patients basically taking the vaccine. You may see a rise in the blood sugars, and then you may return back to normal. So here again, it depends on your healthcare system and the recommendation that is made. So I don't want to give a blanket statement that you should take this or the other. I don't want to invade in that territory. In other words, I'm hiding behind that rather than
I think you've taken a safer route. No arguments. Gentlemen, we're running out of time. We have about just under 5 minutes or so left in the program. Indeed, certainly, we have to continue this conversation. But 2 things I want us to touch on before we possibly wrap door. We continue to talk about managing the process, and certainly, how important is it? Let's talk about what the management kit should be like, not just during a pandemic of this nature, but an emergency as part of the daily routine and daily life of a diabetic. What are some of the things that should always be at hand, or at least easily available to them? Dr. Matthijs.
Well, we look at diabetes as a whole because of the complication. And we keep that in mind. We are trying to prevent small vessel disease and large vessel disease. Large vessel disease, I'm referring to stroke and heart attack. Small vessels disease, I'm referring to blind, kidney failure, amputations, etc. So keeping that in mind, as a diabetic individual, you always want to know where you are. What are your numbers to help control? Because you cannot go a week and not knowing what your numbers are. Similarly, if you're driving a car, you want to know how much gas you have in the tank so you know your distance. That's what I want you to be aware of. So, number one, the first thing you should do, diet and exercise every day. Whatever dietary restraints you should have, it's easy, it's cost effective, etc., and lifestyle change. So I recommend lifestyle change. Yes, the gentleman did mention about the cost of the test strips. Test at least once a day, different time. Be consistent with the prescribed medication. If you have any side effects, bring it to the attention of your prescribing physician. And get an eye exam every year, get your foot exam whenever you go to the physician, etc., get your urine check. In Grenada, the incidence of kidney disease is alarmingly high and is not screened so often. Get your kidney function be evaluated. Dialysis on the upswing, and that there's a plethora of things I wish we can do it. That's why diabetes is a holistic measurement, and I do hope I have shed some insight there.
Dr. Joseph?
Oh, I don't know how you expect me to go after that. But no. I'm just going to echo some of the same sentiments. It's getting very, very disciplined and treating your diet, your exercise regimen, and your medication as life and death, right? We talk about it and we try to be very pleasant and very, open to the discussion. But the hard facts is, for a diabetic, controlling your blood sugars is a matter of life and death, right? Controlling getting your kidneys checked is important, because a lot of diabetics go on with their blood sugars on control and they're slowly having kidney damage. And then one day they're admitted to the hospital and they find out that their kidneys are no longer functioning and they have to go on dialysis. Right? Dialysis is a costly endeavor, costing almost $6,000 EC dollars a month in order for you to sustain functioning kidney replacement, right? So my whole takeaway message is to do everything you can and treat your diabetes as something that's life and death. You get very disciplined. If you need to get an exercise book and log your diet, if you need to get into an exercise program, you need to follow up with other diabetics, just to become very disciplined and know your numbers. An important number you need to know that I think doctor forgot to mention was your A1C, right? Which is the almost like the holy grail for endocrinologists. Right? It's a number that all diabetics should know. It's a measurement that we use to see how well your diabetes has been controlled over a period of about 3 months. And for a diabetic, we want it to be below 7%. And that's like a good goal. So every 3 months, you should be working to lower your A1C. All right? And how you do that? You control your daily numbers. A good rule of thumb: before meals, you want to go have your blood sugar below 130 and around less than 180 after meals. That's just a general ballpark. Your doctor may discuss stricter goals depending on your individual patients and what might be required. So that's my wrap up for our diabetes. Right? I think Dr. Matthias, would have done an exquisite job, and I just added my 2 pennies at the end.
Well, you've added a couple, 2 pences there, Dr. Joseph. So you probably have added up to a whole $1 by now. Just a couple 2 pence. We're literally almost at a time, gentlemen. But let's just, while we added, though, in wrapping, as it relates to the management process, I'm taking my medication, I'm following the regimen, but I'm also, because gentlemen can well appreciate, we're Grenadians, we're Caribbean people, and we have the luxury of a lot of local stuff. Now, whether Granny told us or we found that over the course of time, that somehow may or may not help to manage certain processes in our bodies. What would be your recommendation to an individual that's saying, you know what, I think I'm going to try all of those? Dr. Matthias?
Well, I will let him try it. I will let him try it, and to the fullest. Because if you don't allow that patient to try the taboo or the myth, etc., he will not or she will not be 100% convinced when you make a regimen change. So I always tell the patient, okay, you may, but I would like for you to monitor your blood sugars during that process. It's not just go and then come back and just say, all right, I'm ready to try. I want them to see, with whatever you are doing, let's see what's happening. Through my experience holding diabetic clinic on the island, there were a couple folks who were using the herbal remedy, and I have seen some benefits. But when I asked the question of quantity, is it the yellow leaf, the green leaf, the dry leaf, the top leaf, the bottom leaf? How much do you boil? How long do you boil it for? How do you? We need that kind of evidence. As scientists, we just can't just abruptly say do this or do that. We need the evidence. Data is important so that we can replicate the outcome. So I would say try your local, and then we advance into the evidence-based medicine.
Gentlemen, it was a pleasure indeed, and we want to say thanks for being part of this edition, to this evening's edition of Beyond the Headlines. Certainly, we've only just touched the tip of the iceberg. It's a conversation that needs to go in depth. Reminding you folks that your diabetic condition goes way beyond our current pandemic. Pandemic or no pandemic, you have to manage. Reminding you to check out the Grenada Diabetes Association. On November 14th is World Diabetes Day, and the Grenada Diabetes Association will be observing that day with a month-long series of activities, this one being among them. And so because of the pandemic, the association, they've been forced to tweak the way what they do and how they do it. But I certainly want you to get into the habit of managing, knowing your numbers, do what you have to do in it, take care of yourself. It is your life. It is worth living it. One life to live. I suggest you live it to the fullest. Until we meet again, so long, everybody. Thanks for being part of this edition of Beyond the Headlines. Until so long, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph.
All right.
Imagine having the home of your dreams. Imagine investing in that piece of property you can call your own. Imagine finally doing that home improvement project you've always been thinking about. It's time to stop imagining and start doing. Let the GUT Credit Union help you take the first step with